Okay, in this video, we're going to show how to use HDRI images and image-based lighting and dealing with using a backplate. Okay, so just to start off, I've already set my project folder and want to come up here and let's make sure our unit setup is correct. We've got generic units, we don't want that. I'm going to use US standard. I prefer feet with decimal inches. Okay, let's check our unit setup. It's set for feet. That'll work great because I'm doing a pretty big area, so feet would work good. So that'll be fine. So let's start off by just creating us a ground plane in here. And we'll just go ahead and zero it out. And that's got the bounding box in there, which is the little box. J on your keyboard will turn your bounding box off. Okay, so we've got a plane in there, and let's go here and set the size of it. And I'm going to go for maybe, I think the environment I'm going to use is about 50 feet by about 50 feet would be fine. Be pretty close to start with. And so let's go ahead and bring in our backplate. So let's come in here, go to Maps, Standard, and we're going to bring in a bitmap. And we'll go to backplates here, and I've got several of them in here. And I think I'll go for this one. Okay. And I'm going to bring that in. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that I can see it in my viewport here. So I'm going to right click up here where it says realistic, go down to viewport background. And we're going to go in here where it says custom image file. And then I'm going to come set the custom image file by going to configure viewport background. And then this is where I'm going to load the file in right here. So I'm going to load that same file in. And I'm going to match bitmap so that my aspect ratio matches it. I'm going to apply it to this viewport. And there we go. So that's okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and set my render settings up the way that I want to have them set up. And so I'm going to come in here. I don't want to render the god-awful 640 by 480, 1980 size. We'll go to HD TV, and I'll render mine out at 1280 by 720. That'll work fine. And then I'm going to click Control F, which will turn on my safe frame so that that matches up. Okay, so now what I've got is my plane in here. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of come in here and kind of line it up a little bit so my grid is pretty close. And then I'm going to use a utility and in Max to set up my perspective. So I just initially just kind of get it kind of close. Something like that. It's pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to go over here to my utility panel, and I'm going to go over here where it says perspective match. Okay, now what this is going to allow me to do is to match the perspective of the image. So I'm going to come in here, show vanishing lines, and then you're going to have these lines that show up. Okay, so we just click and grab these lines, and you're just trying to find a place where we can anchor these, which will give us vanishing lines. Okay. So let's go ahead, give me, grab another one and put up here. I'll put that point right there. I'm going to go along that line right there. That's pretty good. So I've got one down here and here. Let's go ahead and get one along the bottom edge here. That looks pretty good. Let's take this other one and we're going to put it along these windows up here. Okay. And let's go ahead and let's grab, say, this one. We'll make this one go about there along that edge. Let's get this one over here. And something about like that is correct. So that looks pretty good. Okay, so I can now, my perspective's pretty good. It's going to adjust this a little bit. Okay, let's adjust my plane. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, let's go ahead and save this file, save as. Now I've already set up my project folder, so it'll go right in here. And we'll just call this backplate underscore HDRI. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is to go in here and I'm going to go ahead and save this active viewport. So I'm going to go save active perspective view. Now the reason I do that is if I move this, then I can come back to right to this point. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing in this viewport up here. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to go ahead and match this. Okay. And this should be a perspective view. And then I'm going to restore the active view. It gives me the same view as the other one now. So they're both the same. Go ahead and do my Shift F, so save frame. Okay, so what I'm going to do is convert this perspective into a camera. Now, a perspective is a camera view, but I can't actually grab a hold of the camera. So all I have to do is while I'm in here is do Control C, and that will turn it into a camera. Now we'll have camera attributes in here. Now, one of the things that I want to do on this piece is I want to come in here and I want to get this object's properties, okay? And if I go to details, then I can tell what kind of focal length this has, okay? Now, this person's went ahead and put it in here for me, 28 millimeter, but just to show, you can go into your details and you'll find it right here, 28 millimeter, okay? So what I'm going to do here is right here where it says lens, I'm going to uncheck specify field of view, and here's my focal length, and I'm going to type in 28. And then now my lens on this camera and the lens on the image are the same. I can come in here, double check this again, go show vanishing points. And you're going to get an error down here. It says target cameras are not supported by perspective match, okay? And what that means is by default, when you create this physical camera up here, it has a target, okay? So what we're going to do is come in here to your physical camera and unclick target so it no longer has a target. Now I can come in here and show my vanishing lines and just double check to make sure my lines didn't change any. This one, just a hair right there. This one seems to be off just a little. Just going to adjust these a little bit. Looks pretty good. This one may be off just a hair. That looks pretty good. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Okay, so that looks good. Okay. So we can turn those off, and let's go ahead and save as, hit our plus button. So we save these in stages. And so now I've got my camera set up. Okay, so let's go ahead and get in here and let's create our shader for this. Okay, so for our ground plane, we're using Arch and Design shaders. There's a matte shadow reflection shader here, and that's what we're going to put on the ground. Okay. So just pick our ground and assign this to it. And then in our camera map background right here, we're going to pull into mental ray. And what we need is the environment background camera map. Okay, so this is the node. Now, if you plug your bitmap directly into it, it'll actually project on there, okay, but if we decide we want to do reflections on there, the reflections won't be correct. So you need to always make sure you put this node in here. Okay, so we're going to put this in there. Now, on this node, we need to make sure it'll default as a texture that we want it as an environment. And then we want it on screen. Okay, so it's projecting it straight on the screen. Okay, so I'm just going to unplug this for a second. And we'll just do a render. And so we'll just go ahead and put an arch and design in here. So I want to show you something. So I'm just going to initially overwrite that and put our arch and design in here and render this. And what you're going to see is a gray background. I mean, a gray ground plane, just as what we thought. But you see that the background's not showing up in here. That's because what we did is we initially set it up to show in our viewport, but we didn't actually put it into our environment. Okay. So what we want to do is to actually put it in our environment. So if you go to rendering environment, then this environment window will come up. And we need to put that node in our environment also. Okay, do it as an instance. That means that anytime I make a change here, it'll make a change there. Okay, so now when I render this, that image will show up in the background. Okay, and this has some odd striations because of the reflections on there, because I've got that arch and design on there. So this is where we'll come in here and now go ahead and put our matte shadow on the ground. And now when we render that, it'll project it back on there. Okay, so now I've got the plane and I've got my matte shadow, which does camera mapping and maps the background on it. And then I have our background showing up. And so it's seamless where it put those together. Okay, so matte shadow on the ground. You've got to have this environment node in here, and then your bitmap in there, and then your bitmap is environment and screen. Okay, so this is my background, and I'm going to label this screen so I know it's on screen. Okay, now let's go ahead and put us something in here. Okay, so what we're going to do is come in here and let's make a sphere. And let's go for something like, let's go for a 4-foot radius. We'll put some big spheres in here. And then I'll need to go to a front viewport where I can actually see that being put in. And actually, if I actually go here and on the z-axis, let's see here, 4 feet. If I go 4 feet up on this, on the z-axis, then it'll be sitting right on there because it's 4-foot radius, which means it's an 8-foot sphere. Okay. So now we'll kind of slide that across. And we can do region renders now to kind of speed up our process. So what we'll do is just draw us a region around that. And now we'll be able to see our sphere in here. Okay, now right now, we're not getting any shadowing in here or because we haven't put any lighting in here. Okay, so what we're going to do is come in here and we're going to add a skylight. Okay, so lights, standard. And we'll do a skylight. Now, I know this confuses people a lot because I tell them I only want you to use photometric, but the standard skylight, which is what we do for IBL, where we're going to put our HDRI in here. Okay. So right now, if I render, once I've put that in here, I'm going to start getting shadows underneath it. Okay. So this is global illumination, which we're using Final Gather to do that, and you're going to get some shadowing under there. Now, I'm going to go for 10 on my multiplier, and the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to come in here and I'm going to jump and put my exposure control. I'm going to add a mental ray exposure control, and then I want to turn it on the environment, so it's processing what's in here and the environment. And then I want to zero this out. Okay, let's see what we get here. Okay, It's pretty bright right now, but that's because I don't have my HDR in there, and we'll adjust that. Okay, so that's a good starting point. All right, now we need to get our HDRI image in here. Okay, to do that, we're going to come in here, and I'm just going to take this node and hold down my shift key and drag it. And so I have a second node, and this is where I'm going to go in and put my HDR in here. Okay, now, a couple things about your HDRs. You have an HDR that is an ENV, is an environment, and then you have one that's a reflection, okay? And the reflection is the one that I want to use for reflecting around the object, okay? Just leave the defaults when we come in here. Now, we need to load that. We want it to reflect in the environment, so we need to load that into our environment slot. But we have a problem in here, is we've already got this one in the environment slot. So what we need is called an environment background switcher. So if you go to Maps, Mental Ray, and get an environment background switcher, this node allows you to load one image in the background and have a different image for reflections. So we'll take our original background and put in that, and then load this into this slot and override it. Okay, and then we're going to put this one in the reflection slot. Okay, now this one needs to be an environment, but it needs to be spherical so it wraps around our environment. Okay, and so this is the one that goes in the reflection that reflects around our object. And so I'm going to go ahead and take this Arch and Design material, just a default, and put it on our object here, and then let's do a render. Okay, and I'm going to do some adjustments here on this sphere. By the way, I'm going to come over here and turn it up to 60 iterations so that it's smoother. And let's bring up our light lister here, and I'm just going to turn down this light for right now, and then we'll bump it back up later. Okay, you'll see we're getting some reflections in it. Now, a good one to kind of test with this is to use a chrome ball. So let's just go to our material and just go to one of these presets. Let's go to chrome. And now you'll see our environment that wrapped around it. Okay. And now we need to start getting our HDR in our Skylight. Okay. Now, I see a lot of people taking this and dragging it in here, but really we want a separate node for this. Okay. So this is my dome. Okay. And this one, I load in this one, which is a blurred version, a smaller blurred version of it. Okay, we want to do that because we don't need all that detail that's in there for the light. Okay, and it'll render faster. Okay, so this is my light HDRI. This is my dome HDRI. Okay, and so we'll put the light one over here into our background. Okay, and then that's going to add its lighting attributes to it. Okay, that's getting better. Okay, let's brighten it up a little bit. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Okay, now one of the things you're going to notice is that when I render this, it's a little dark in here, okay? And that's because I have the photometric exposure control on, the middle ray exposure control on. Now, the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put a photometric light in here in a few minutes, and if I don't, it's going to blow out the photometric light. So it's kind of an odd thing that we're doing because we're blending a skylight, which is non-physical based, with a photometric, which is physical based. So we kind of have to cheat a little bit. So what I'm going to do in here is to change this exposure value down just a little bit. Let's go for minus 0.4. And now render that, and that'll boost that up, that we're pretty close to where we're not changing it a lot. And let's turn that off, and yeah, you'll see it's pretty close. It's a little off, but it's pretty close. Now, what we could have done is turned off this processing, the background, but then it means that you're going to probably see the edge of that plane in here. So we want to process both the 3D geometry, which is what the 3D geometry and lights, and that background at the same time, so we stay linked up with that. So we're going to go with something like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and go back over here and pop my multiplier back up to 10. We're having to go with a high multiplier. I mean, normally on a Skylight, you're using like 1, maybe at the boost to 2. But since this is not a physical base Skylight, it's not physically accurate, we're having to really bump it up brighter to kind of go with these. Okay. All right. I'm going to put some different materials in here now so we can see how different things are reacting with this. And so let's go ahead and go in here. And I'm going to turn off realistic, just shaded. And let's go ahead. And I'm going to make a copy. And let's go ahead and make, let's do 4. And we'll go maybe here. I want these kind of overlapping because I'm going to do some reflections so we can kind of have these overlapping to each other. Maybe something like that. Okay, let's bring some materials in here. So let's go ahead and we've got the chrome. Leave the chrome on that one. Let's go ahead and bring in another arch and design. And let's use a copper as a base on this, so metal. I don't want this mapping channel. This is an anisotropy. It's on the vertex channel. I'm going to do an automatics, and then let's go ahead and change the color on this. Let's go with something, let's go with kind of a steel kind of blue. Okay, and we'll put that on that one. And let's make another one. And for this one, let's go something real dull like, rubber would be good. Okay, we'll put that one on this one. And then let's do one more. And for this one, let's go for, say, glass. We're going to go in here and let's go down to a preset, and we'll use physical glass on that. We'll put that one on that one. Okay, let's do a Reagent Render on this. Okay, so it won't take as long. And then I'm going to pause the render while it's rendering so that you don't have to sit here and wait on this. And so I'm going to pause it. Okay, so here's the render. Now, I also decided those spheres were a little bit big, so instead of 4 feet, I changed them to 3-foot spheres. And so you can see they're reflecting into each other. We've got the shadowing going in here, okay, from our HDRI file. So we got our image-based lighting going on, lighting it. And then I'm going to go in here and put another light in here. I'm going to put a photometric light, okay, so to add a little bit more dynamic nature to this. Okay, so I'm going to do that. So let's go over here to the top view. And we're going to go in here to Photometrics. We'll do a free light, and I'll place one right here. Let's go ahead into a wireframe. Okay, so shadows, we want ray trace shadows all the time. And we want Kelvin, we want this neutral, so we'll go 6500 on it. And we want a rectangle. Okay, now I'm going to make this a pretty big reflector, so it'll diffuse that light some. Maybe something like that. And we're going to go up, and then we're going to rotate it, shooting out like that a little bit. So back to our camera, and let's render that. Okay, I'm going to render that, and I'm going to pause this while it's rendering, and then we'll come back in. Okay, so now that I've got those rendered, I put them in here in my RAM player. Okay, you have a RAM player under rendering, compare media RAM player. Allows us to load two different images in. So what I have loaded over here on the left side is the rendering with just the skylight, and the one on the right is the rendering with the photometric added in. So if I can slide this over, let's slide this over to here. So what you're seeing right there is just the skylight with the HDRI in it, and then this is with the added photometric in it. Okay, so I'm adding some additional highlights into it, and it's adding a little bit more of a shadow into it coming on this back side because I've got it kind of shining back across it. Okay, so I can add some additional lights. I think I'm going to add another additional light. I want to highlight on this area right here. Okay, so what I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to come in and I'm going to add a standard light, and I'm going to add an Omni Light. You're like, oh my gosh, he's adding an Omni Light. He always knows never to use standard lights. Well, for this particular case, this is what I'm going to do. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop an Omni Light in here. Okay, while it's selected, I'm going to go up here and get this alignment tool right here. Okay, this allows me to move it to align to a surface. And now when I click and hold down on this, then it's going to move it around until it's placing a highlight where I want it, which is right about there. Okay. Now, this particular sphere is sphere 03, and we'll just name this one. This is the rubber one, so we'll call this rubber. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Omni, and I'm going to include it only onto the rubber sphere. Okay, so by going to exclude right here and clicking this include, putting the rubber over here, that's the only thing it will shine on is that. And then I'm also going to go down here to its advanced effect, and I'm going to turn off diffuse, and it will only add a specular to it. So all it would do is add a specular highlight to that. So we'll just do a Reagent Render on that. Okay, and I'm going to have to turn it up, and let's go for, say, maybe, I don't know, 10, and let's see what we get. Okay, and then that's going to give me a little bit of a highlight on there. Okay, so I'm using it. I think that's a little hot. So let's back off of it, maybe 5. And that's a little better. Okay. Now I'm going to show you another little trick I do with my glass a lot. Okay. So what I'm going to do on this little glass piece right here is I'm going to take it and I'm going to put a shell modifier on it. Okay. This will give it thickness. Now by default, it comes out. And I don't want an outie, I want an innie. And so I just want it to come in just a little bit. As a matter of fact, we're going to come in here from, let's go from the left side to look at this. And get a little bit closer to it. And so we'll go wireframe, and so you can see this is adding a thickness to it. Okay, then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this. Actually, I'm not going to scale it. I'm going to take it and right-click clone it to make a clone as a copy, not an instance. And then on this one, I'm going to make it smaller. And so I want it to go in so it's a little bit inside. So there's a little bit of a gap between it and that shell. And I'm going to leave a shell on this one. And I don't want this one to be as thick as the other one. Okay, so we're going to go with something like that. And then let's do a Reagent Render on that. And I'll show you what we get. We're going to pause it while we're rendering that. Okay, so there that double glass is. The other thing I did is while I was rendering it, I also took that same Omni Light and I included it to shine on this too. So this Omni Light's causing this highlight and it's causing these highlights too as it bounced through there. Now you'll see there's a little bit of graininess in this stuff because I'm not rendering it very high quality. So what I'm going to do is to add some quality to it. So we're going to go over here to our Photometric in here. And right down here is your shadow samples, which is the quality of the shadow. We're going to turn that up to 256. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go into our shaders. Okay. We're going to kick up the quality of the shaders. So like on this metal shader right here, we got samples right here. We're going to kick this up to 128. It's much higher quality of speculars on it. I'm going to do the same on this rubber. Oh, actually, I don't have to do on the rubber, but on, actually, I think that's the only one is that metal. I have to do that too. Okay, and then we're going to just kick up our quality of render here. So I'm going to tell it to do two passes on our final gather with 2 bounces. I'm going to turn up my soft shadow precision some here. My glossy reflections and refractions up a little bit and turn up my noise that's in my renders. And the thing about it is I still can do a Reagent Render because the background is just the background. So all we're processing is the 3D and any of the lighting in here. So I'm going to go with that, render that, and it'll be a higher quality. Matter of fact, let's go to our RAM player again. And we'll go ahead and snapshot this one so we can see a before and after with that. Okay. So I'm going to pause it while I render this higher rendering and then come back for the final evaluation of what we're doing. Okay, so the rendering is finished now, and I've put it in my RAM player here. And so this one on the left is the original one, and then this is the high detail one. You know, you can tell the difference. You'll see a lot of times people are doing renders and turn to me, and you'll see all this graininess in your reflections, and you'll see now it's nice and smooth in that highlight. Look at the detail that's in this metal back here, and now you'll see it's got much more detail in it. Okay. So that's when you're just making a higher quality render. So let's just go back and reiterate what we've done here. So basically what we've done is set up a plane. We initially started with a perspective. I usually start with a perspective. That's the easiest to do. Then you're coming in here and you're going over to your utility panel and you're going perspective mask, show vanishing lines, and you're lining all these lines up. And then you're changing it to a camera, and then you might need to adjust that a little bit. I go ahead and set my plane down first and measure it out so I know it's the correct size and all my measurements are correct. And then we've gone in and started laying our information in. Okay, and just to go back over that real quick, we don't really need to see these shaders. We'll just delete these out of here. And so we've got a matte shadow shader on there. Okay, need to make sure that you always put an environment node in here. Okay, this is going to be your environment background camera map node. You probably won't notice much difference putting this node in here unless you don't have reflections, but a lot of times what we're doing is we may have a wet surface and we're putting some reflections down in here. You do that on your matte shadow by coming down here and turning on reflections, and then there's some controls down there. I'll do another one at a later date and kind of show you how to do that. So you put that node in, and then you're doing your background. Now, in our case, because we're putting it in a background plate, okay, and a lot of times we're maybe doing tabletop stuff, so we're not putting a background plate, but I wanted to show you how to do the background plate. Then, that will be, your background image. This is not your HDRI image, okay? This is a background plate that came with the HDRI image. And of course, you could use different background plates too, but this is what a real one would be if we were really trying to put a 3D model into a scene. And we would go out and shoot our own background plates, and we would make our own HDRI. And of course, that's a whole nother video too. But you need to make sure this is on environment and it's on screen, so it projects to our screen. Okay, and then we have our HDRI image, which is on a dome. Okay, so we're dropping that into our background. So that's under rendering, environment, and we're dropping it into this slot right here. Now, because of the nature of what I'm doing, I'm using a switcher in here because I want the background to show the plate and I want the reflection to show the dome. Okay, and so I'm putting the switcher into our environment slot. Okay. And then the other thing that I'm doing is to get your image-based lighting. So you're putting a skylight in here, and then you're putting an HDR in here. Okay. Now, remember that the HDR that I'm putting in here is not the really big one that's with all the detail. It just takes it longer to render. So it's a smaller one with that's blurred. Now, if you didn't come with a blur, a lot of these come with blurred ones, but a lot of them don't. Then what I'll do is take my original one and I'll take it into Photoshop. I drop it down to maybe about 600 pixels wide, and then I'll blur it, and then I'll save it back out as the one that I'll put in my light. Okay. So you don't need the high end one placed in your light. It just takes longer to render, and we don't need all that detail. We want the detail in the reflection, but not detail in our light. Okay, and then, of course, the other thing that I've done in my particular case is I came back in and put a photometric in here to put some additional lights and shadows in here to adjust it a little bit more. That's not always necessary, but I decided to do that. That's why I put my photometric, my exposure control on. And then on my exposure control on, I'm also processing the background. That way, whatever exposure I'm doing here, it's adjusting the objects I put in the scene as well as the background plate. And then the other little trick I did was I put an Omni Light in here, and then I lined it through this little utility right here, which tells us we can align it however we want to place a highlight where we want. And then that Omni Light, the two little tricks I did with it, I'm not doing shadows. I've gone down here, and on its advanced effects, I tell it to only do specular, so it won't add lighting to the diffuse. It just adds highlights. And then I've gone into my include, and I include this rubber ball, and then I included the two glass spheres in it. So it's only hitting those. It's not hitting the others to put highlights in it. And that's how I ended up getting my final result. So hopefully this helps you. All right. Thank you very much.